If you had scrolled through my wife's social media, you'd think we were living a dream. Claire, 31, had built a career as a social media influencer, curating an image of elegance, adventure, and flawless style. With hundreds of thousands of followers hanging on her every post, she had turned our daily lives into a carefully polished gallery of photos and captions. At first, I thought it was amazing. I was proud of her for pursuing a career that gave her so much creative freedom and financial success. Claire loved the spotlight, and social media gave her a platform to share her passions, fashion, travel, and what she called moments of joy. I'm Nick, 33, a digital marketer. Ironically, my own work involves analyzing social media trends and ad performance, but I've always preferred staying behind the scenes. Claire and I balanced each other out that way. She thrived on attention, while I was content being her #1 supporter, helping her brainstorm campaigns or manage logistics when needed. Our marriage wasn't perfect, whose is, but I thought we were happy. We'd been together for 7 years, navigating life as a team. Sure, Claire's influencer lifestyle could be demanding, with its endless need for content creation and constant online engagement. And yes, it sometimes felt like our real lives were getting lost in the pursuit of perfect Instagram moments. But I believed we were solid. At least, I did until a few months ago. That's when I started noticing changes. Claire's posts, once filled with candid shots and heartfelt captions about us, shifted to something more curated, detached even. Her captions emphasized her independence and adventures, often omitting any mention of me. It didn't bother me at first, I figured she was just evolving her brand. But then came the photos, too many photos, shared too frequently, with a precision that felt almost rehearsed. Trips I hadn't known about, events I hadn't been invited to, all documented in glamorous detail. "You're really stepping up your content," I told her one evening as she edited photos on her laptop. "Gotta keep the followers engaged," she replied with a smile, her focus never leaving the screen. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But as the weeks went on, I began to notice something unsettling about those posts. There were subtle inconsistencies in the photos, things that didn't quite add up. A shadow in the corner of a frame that looked like it belonged to someone else. Glasses of wine in front of her, when she claimed to be alone. And captions that seemed overly polished, as though they were trying too hard to sell an idea. It started as a whisper in the back of my mind, a nagging feeling I couldn't shake. I brushed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. Claire's career revolved around her online image. It wasn't unusual for her to stage photos or omit certain details for the sake of aesthetics. But as the days turned into weeks, that whisper grew louder. Her increasing detachment, the way she guarded her phone, the trips that seemed to come out of nowhere, it all felt off. Looking back, I can see the cracks now, clear as day. But at the time, I couldn't have imagined just how deep they ran, or how much those perfectly curated photos would unravel the life we'd built together. The first time I felt something was truly wrong, it wasn't one of Claire's posts that tipped me off, it was her behavior. Claire had always been busy, but lately, it felt like she was on a different level. Every week seemed to bring a new brand collaboration or networking event that required her to travel or attend exclusive gatherings. At first, I was excited for her. She'd worked hard to build her platform, and these opportunities were the payoff. But the invitations started to feel suspiciously selective. "You can't come to this one," she said one evening as she packed for an overnight trip. "It's a private retreat for creators, no plus ones allowed." I nodded, trying to suppress the pang of disappointment. "Sounds fun. Where's it at again?" "Upstate," she replied casually, zipping her suitcase. "It's just a quick trip. I'll be back tomorrow night." She kissed me on the cheek and was gone before I could ask for more details. When she posted about the retreat the next day, it was a carousel of beautifully staged photos, a rustic cabin, a stunning sunset over the woods, and Claire lounging by a fireplace with a glass of wine. The captions were vague, as usual, something about finding inspiration in nature. I wanted to be happy for her, but something about the photos nagged at me. The angles seemed off. There was a second glass of wine on the table in one of the shots, partially cropped out, and the lighting suggested someone else had taken the pictures. I told myself I was reading too much into it. Claire had always said she liked to use timers for her photos or ask fellow creators to help. Maybe it was another influencer who'd been at the retreat with her. Still, the uneasiness lingered. It wasn't just the photos, though. It was the way she acted when she came home. Normally, she'd chat about her trips, sharing funny anecdotes or behind-the-scenes details. This time, she was unusually quiet. How was the retreat? I asked that evening as we sat down for dinner. Good, she said, poking at her food without looking up. Lots of networking, you know how it is. Her answer felt rehearsed, like she was trying to close the conversation before it started. Who else was there? I pressed, keeping my tone casual. Oh, just some other influencers. No one you'd know, she replied, her smile tight. That should have been the end of it, but the doubt in my mind only grew. Over the next few weeks, her social media posts became even more frequent, as if she were compensating for something. Each photo was a masterclass in curation, glowing landscapes, perfectly plated meals, and Claire, always front and center, looking effortlessly glamorous. The captions began to feel off. Phrases like embracing freedom and finding my own path started to replace the light-hearted updates I was used to. Then there were the subtle inconsistencies. Photos taken in a city she hadn't mentioned visiting, or details in the background that didn't match her stories. In one post, she claimed to be on a solo trip to a boutique hotel, yet the reflection in a window showed two figures. I noticed these things but told myself they didn't mean anything. Claire had always loved her independence. Maybe she just needed some space, or maybe the pressures of her career were getting to her. But the doubts wouldn't go away. One night, as I lay in bed scrolling through her Instagram, I decided to look at the comments. Most were from fans and fellow influencers, gushing over her style, asking for travel tips, or leaving heart emojis. But one comment caught my eye. Looks like an amazing trip. Who's the lucky photographer? Claire hadn't replied, but the question hit me like a ton of bricks. I stared at the photo in question, a shot of her standing on a bridge at sunset, her hair perfectly windswept. Who was the photographer? It was a question I couldn't shake, and it was the moment I realized that maybe I wasn't being paranoid after all. After that comment, something shifted in me. I couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't ignore the possibility that there was more to Claire's photos than she let on. I told myself I was just being thorough, but deep down, I knew I was looking for something, anything, that could explain the uneasy feeling gnawing at me. That night, after Claire went to bed, I sat on the couch and opened her Instagram. I started scrolling back through her posts, paying closer attention to the details I'd once ignored. It felt wrong, like I was invading her privacy, but I couldn't stop myself. At first, everything seemed normal. Perfectly staged shots of Claire sipping coffee in chic cafes, strolling through parks, or posing in designer outfits. But the deeper I dug, the more I noticed patterns that didn't add up. One photo, taken during her solo retreat, showed a pristine table set for two. 2 plates, 2 glasses of wine, 2 sets of silverware. I dismissed it at the time, assuming it was just part of the aesthetic she was going for. But now, it felt glaringly obvious. Another post, captioned, "Exploring the city's hidden gems," showed her standing in front of a small art gallery. It was a beautiful shot, the kind she loved sharing, but there was a faint shadow on the ground, someone standing just outside the frame. It was the same with so many of her posts. A hand barely visible in the corner of a photo. A second coffee cup sitting on the table. Subtle, almost imperceptible clues that someone else had been there. I started looking at her stories, too, which she'd archived on her profile. One in particular caught my attention, a short video of Claire laughing as she walked along a cobblestone street. The camera followed her with a fluidity that couldn't have come from a timer or a tripod. Someone had been holding it, someone who wasn't me. My chest tightened as the evidence piled up. The more I looked, the more I realized that her photos told a different story than the one she'd been telling me. I decided to dig deeper, cross-referencing her posts with the accounts of other influencers she often collaborated with. Most of their content matched hers, photos of group events, behind-the-scenes shots from campaigns. But one account stood out. It belonged to a man named Alex, a photographer Claire had mentioned once or twice in passing. I scrolled through his feed, my stomach sinking as I realized how many of his photos mirrored hers. Landscapes, cityscapes, even candid shots of Claire that she hadn't posted herself. The captions were vague, but the timing was suspicious. Every time Claire had been on one of her solo trips, Alex had shared photos from the same locations. It couldn't be a coincidence. I hesitated before clicking on his tagged posts, unsure if I wanted to see what else might connect them. But my curiosity overpowered my fear. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. A photo of Claire, smiling brightly as she leaned against a balcony railing, was tagged on Alex's profile. The caption read, "Another stunning shot from last week's shoot. Always a pleasure to work with talented people." Talented people. Not person. The comments on the post were filled with compliments and questions about the location, but one reply from Claire stood out, "Couldn't have done it without you. Thanks for everything, Alex." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the pieces were starting to form a picture I couldn't ignore. If Alex was just a work contact, why hadn't Claire mentioned him more? Why were there so many signs pointing to his presence in moments she'd claimed were solo? The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that there was more to their relationship than just professional collaboration. I closed my laptop, my hands shaking. The room felt too quiet, too oppressive. I needed to confront Claire, but I wasn't ready, not yet. I needed more. And so, I made a decision that I knew would change everything. I would keep looking. The next few days passed in a blur of tension and quiet investigation. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen, but I wasn't ready to confront Claire yet. If I was wrong, I'd destroy our marriage over a misunderstanding. But if I was right, I needed to be certain. Every evening, after Claire went to bed, I scoured her social media for more clues. Her Instagram, her TikTok, even her Twitter, every post, every caption, every tagged location felt like a piece of a puzzle. I started paying attention to Alex's posts, too. He wasn't just a photographer, he was a storyteller, documenting his travels and collaborations in meticulous detail. His captions were short and artistic, usually a reflection or a quote about the moment he'd captured. But it wasn't the captions that stood out, it was the timing. Every time Claire posted about a trip or an event, Alex posted something from the same location within days. A photo of the same skyline, the same coffee shop, or the same hotel balcony. He rarely included people in his photos, but when he did, they were cropped in ways that left me suspicious. One post in particular made my stomach drop. It was a photo of a dinner table set for two, the same one Claire had shared weeks ago. But Alex's angle showed the full table, and the person seated across from him, while mostly out of frame, was unmistakably Claire. I stared at the photo for what felt like hours, my mind racing. She hadn't mentioned this dinner, hadn't tagged him in her post. But there she was, clear as day, sitting across from him like it was the most normal thing in the world. It wasn't just Alex's posts that raised alarms. As I revisited Claire's old stories and photos, I noticed another pattern, the same locations, over and over, often under the guise of solo trips or creative retreats. Her captions, once endearing, now felt hollow. Finding inspiration sounded more like a cover for meeting Alex. The photos that once made me proud of her now made my stomach turn. One evening, I finally found the clue that shattered any lingering doubts. It was a tagged photo on Alex's account, one I'd missed before because it wasn't of Claire directly. It showed a group of people at a rooftop bar, laughing and holding drinks. In the background, partially obscured but still recognizable, was Claire. She wasn't laughing like the others, she was leaning toward Alex, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The intimacy of the gesture hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just a professional relationship. This was something more. I saved the photo and stared at it, my mind a mix of anger and heartbreak. How long had this been going on? How many of her work trips had been excuses to see him? That night, Claire came home late from another networking event. She breezed into the kitchen, her face glowing with the kind of energy that used to make me happy. Now, it just felt like a slap in the face. "Hey," she said, dropping her bag on the counter. "How was your day?" "Fine," I replied, my voice tight. She didn't seem to notice the edge in my tone. She grabbed a glass of water and started talking about her event, who she'd met, what they discussed, but I barely heard her. All I could think about was that photo. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand an explanation for everything. But I held back. I needed to be calm, to gather my thoughts before I said something I couldn't take back. Claire kissed me on the cheek before heading to bed, her casual affection feeling like an insult. I waited until I heard her soft, even breathing before opening my laptop again. This time, I wasn't looking for more clues. I was preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The lies, the photos, the carefully curated facade, it was all about to come crashing down. The confrontation was inevitable. I spent the next day replaying everything in my head, from Claire's suspicious behavior to the damning evidence I'd pieced together from her social media. Every time I thought about that rooftop photo, her hand on Alex's arm, the way she leaned toward him, I felt a surge of anger and heartbreak. By the time Claire came home that evening, I was ready. She walked into the kitchen, setting her bag down with the same practiced ease I'd seen 100 times before. But tonight, everything about her felt different to me. "Hey," she said, flashing me a smile. "How was your day?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled out my phone and set it on the counter between us, the rooftop photo open on the screen. "Who's Alex?" I asked, my voice calm but icy. Claire's smile faltered. She glanced at the photo, her expression quickly shifting from surprise to something I couldn't quite read, guilt. Fear. "He's a photographer I've worked with a few times," she said cautiously. "Why?" "Because this doesn't look like work to me," I replied, pointing at the photo. Claire's eyes darted away, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her bag. "Nick, I can explain." "Then explain," I interrupted, my voice rising. "Explain the rooftop photo. Explain why he's in so many of your trips. Explain why you've been lying to me." Her shoulders sagged, and she let out a shaky breath. "I wasn't lying," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just didn't tell you everything." "Not telling me everything is lying, Claire," I snapped. "Do you think I'm stupid? I've seen the photos, the comments, the way you act when you're around him. Just be honest with me. Are you having an affair?" She flinched at the word, her face crumpling as tears filled her eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "I never meant to hurt you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, the kitchen felt impossibly small, the air heavy with the weight of her confession. "How long?" I asked, my voice cracking. Claire wiped at her eyes, but the tears kept coming. "A few months," she admitted. "It started as work. We were collaborating on a project, and we just connected. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I swear. Her words felt hollow, like they couldn't begin to explain the betrayal I was feeling. So, while I was here, trusting you, supporting you, you were off with him? Taking trips, lying about where you were, pretending everything was fine. I was confused, she said, her voice breaking. I felt like we were drifting apart, like you didn't see me anymore. And Alex, he made me feel. Don't, I said sharply, cutting her off. Don't try to justify this by blaming me. If you were unhappy, you should have talked to me. You should have fought for us, not run to someone else. Claire's sobs grew louder, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The anger and pain were too raw, too overwhelming. I don't even know who you are anymore, I said finally, my voice heavy with despair. Everything I thought we had, it's gone, isn't it? I still love you, she said desperately. I made a mistake, but I love you. Please, Nick. Let me fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone with her tears. That night, as I lay awake in the spare room, I felt like my entire world had crumbled. The woman I'd loved, trusted, and built a life with had betrayed me in the most personal way. And now, I was left to decide if there was anything worth salvaging, or if this was the end of our story. The morning after the confrontation was eerily quiet. Claire stayed in the bedroom while I made coffee, the sound of the percolator filling the silence that hung heavy in the air. My thoughts were a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and disbelief. Her words from the night before echoed in my mind, I still love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. I wanted to believe her, but how could love coexist with betrayal? Claire eventually emerged, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she was welcome there. I know I don't deserve it, but, can we talk? She asked softly. I didn't respond right away, staring into my coffee as if it held answers I couldn't find elsewhere. Finally, I nodded. Talk. She let out a shaky breath. I'm sorry, Nick. I know I keep saying that, but I don't know what else to say. I made the worst mistake of my life, and I don't even know how to begin to fix it. I looked at her, my chest tightening. Why, Claire? Why him? Why hide it all? Did you think I wouldn't notice? Or did you just not care? She flinched at my words, tears brimming in her eyes. It wasn't about not caring, she said. I care about you more than anything. But I felt invisible. Like no matter how much I tried, I couldn't get your attention. And then Alex, he noticed me. He made me feel special. That's not an excuse, I said coldly. You could have told me how you felt. You could have fought for us. Instead, you chose to go behind my back. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. The conversation left me drained, and though Claire begged me to give her a chance to make things right, I wasn't ready to decide. Over the next few days, I avoided Claire as much as I could. I buried myself in work, using projects and deadlines as an excuse to stay out of the house. When I was home, I kept my distance, retreating to the spare room and pretending to sleep when she knocked on the door. Despite everything, I couldn't stop thinking about her. The memories of our life together, the laughter, the adventures, the moments of quiet intimacy, kept playing in my mind. It was almost worse than the betrayal itself, because it made me realize how much I still loved her, even after everything. Claire, for her part, seemed determined to prove she was sorry. She deleted Alex's number, stopped posting on social media, and spent her days trying to talk to me or leave me little notes apologizing for what she'd done. One evening, she came to me with a suggestion. I've been looking into therapy, she said, her voice tentative. For us. I know I can't fix this alone, but maybe we could try together. I stared at her, unsure if I had the energy to even attempt such a thing. But the desperation in her eyes, the raw vulnerability she showed, made me pause. "I'll think about it," I said, my tone neutral. And I did. For days, I turned the idea over in my mind, weighing the pain of staying against the pain of letting go. When the weekend came, I found myself sitting on the couch, staring at a framed photo of Claire and me from our honeymoon. We were standing on a beach at sunset, our smiles wide and carefree. Back then, I couldn't have imagined a future where we'd end up like this. I still didn't know if forgiveness was possible, but part of me wasn't ready to give up yet. That evening, I found Claire in the living room, sitting on the floor with her journal open in her lap. She looked up when I entered, her expression cautious. "Let's try therapy," I said, the words feeling heavy but necessary. "I'm not promising anything, but I think we owe it to ourselves to try." Tears filled her eyes, and she nodded quickly. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you for giving me a chance. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was a start. And for now, that was enough." The first therapy session felt like stepping into uncharted territory. Claire and I sat side by side on a plush couch in a quiet, softly lit office. Across from us was Dr. Winters, a calm and composed woman in her 40s who seemed to radiate understanding. She began the session by asking us to share why we were there. Claire spoke first, her voice trembling as she confessed everything, her actions, her guilt, and her desperation to save our marriage. "I know I've hurt Nick in ways I can't take back," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "But I love him, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. When it was my turn, I hesitated, unsure where to begin. "I don't even know if this is fixable," I admitted. "I feel like I've been living a lie. The woman I trusted most in the world, she betrayed me. How do you come back from that?" Dr. Winters nodded thoughtfully, her expression empathetic. "Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and rebuilding it after betrayal is one of the hardest things a couple can face. But it's not impossible. The question is, are you both willing to do the work?" Claire nodded immediately, while I hesitated. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm here because I don't want to make a decision I'll regret later. But I'm not sure if I can ever trust her again." "That's a valid feeling," Dr. Winters said. "Rebuilding trust isn't about blind forgiveness. It's about consistent effort and honesty. Let's start by understanding where things went wrong and what both of you need moving forward." The session was emotionally exhausting. We talked about the cracks in our relationship that had led us to this point, my tendency to bury myself in work, Claire's feelings of invisibility, and the communication breakdown that had allowed resentment to fester. "It doesn't excuse what I did," Claire said, her voice raw. "I made the wrong choice. But I was scared to tell you how I felt because I didn't want to seem ungrateful for everything you do for us." Her words stung, but they also gave me insight I hadn't had before. I'd always prided myself on being a good provider, but I realized now that I'd been so focused on that role that I'd missed the emotional needs Claire had been quietly carrying. Dr. Winters guided us through the conversation, helping us navigate the painful truths without falling into blame or defensiveness. By the end of the session, I felt drained but also oddly lighter, like we'd taken the first step towards something real. In the weeks that followed, therapy became a regular part of our routine. Some sessions were productive, while others felt like we were simply treading water. But through it all, one thing became clear: Claire was trying. She stopped guarding her phone, answering texts in front of me and sharing details about her day without hesitation. She even took a step back from social media, posting less frequently and focusing more on the present. "It's not worth losing you," she told me one evening after a session. "If taking a break from all of it helps us heal, then that's what I'll do." Her actions didn't erase the pain, but they showed me that she was serious about making things right. Slowly, I began to let my guard down, though the scars of her betrayal were still fresh. One night, as we sat on the couch after dinner, Claire turned to me with a hesitant look. "I know it's not much, but I've been writing about us in my journal," she said. "About how I feel, what I want for our future. It's helped me process everything. If you ever want to read it, you can." Her offer caught me off guard. For months, her secrecy with her journal had been one of the triggers of my suspicions. Now, she was offering it to me freely, no strings attached. "I'll think about it," I said, unsure if I was ready to revisit the past in that way. "That's okay," she said softly. "I just wanted you to know it's there." Her openness was another step forward, a small but significant gesture that chipped away at the wall I'd built between us. We still had a long way to go, but for the first time in months, I felt like we were moving in the right direction. Therapy wasn't a magic fix, but it was helping us rebuild something I thought we'd lost forever: hope. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I settled into a rhythm. Therapy became a space where we could untangle the mess we'd created, while our daily lives became an ongoing test of trust and patience. It wasn't easy, but for the first time in months, I felt like we were genuinely working towards something instead of just avoiding the pain. Claire continued to make changes, not just in words but in actions. She scaled back her social media presence significantly, focusing more on the real moments between us. Gone were the constant photos, the curated captions, and the endless need for validation from strangers online. Instead, she spent more time with me, cooking meals together, joining me on walks, or even just sitting in comfortable silence. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Claire spoke up. "I've been thinking about how much I let my work consume me," she said, her voice thoughtful. "I wanted so badly to be successful that I forgot what really mattered. I forgot us." Her admission caught me off guard. I looked at her, standing there in the soft light of the kitchen, and for a moment, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with, the one who used to find joy in the simplest things, long before her influencer lifestyle had taken over. "I don't think it's too late," I said finally, surprising even myself with the sincerity of my words. Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of hope. It wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still moments when the pain of her betrayal hit me like a tidal wave. Sometimes, I'd find myself replaying the rooftop photo in my mind, or remembering the captions that felt so hollow in hindsight. But therapy helped me find ways to process those feelings without letting them control me. Dr. Winters encouraged us to focus on small, meaningful steps rather than trying to fix everything at once. One of those steps was finding ways to reconnect. Claire suggested revisiting old traditions we'd let slip over the years, like our Friday movie nights or Sunday morning hikes. At first, it felt awkward, like we were trying too hard to recreate something that had been lost. But as time went on, those moments started to feel more natural. One Friday night, as we sat on the couch watching an old comedy we used to love, I caught myself laughing. Not a forced laugh, but a genuine one. Claire looked over at me, her eyes bright with a mix of surprise and relief. "I missed this," she said softly. "Me too," I admitted. It wasn't a grand gesture or a sudden epiphany, but it was something. Another turning point came when Claire joined me for a morning run, something she'd never shown much interest in before. "I thought you hated running," I teased as we stretched outside the house. "I do," she said with a laugh. "But I thought it might be nice to do something together, even if I'm terrible at it." We jogged through the neighborhood at a slow pace, her cheeks flushing as she struggled to keep up. By the time we made it back home, she was out of breath but smiling. "Okay, maybe this wasn't my best idea," she said, collapsing onto the porch steps. I laughed, handing her a bottle of water. "You did better than I expected." It was such a small moment, but it reminded me of what we used to have, the laughter, the camaraderie, the simple joy of being together. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself letting go of some of the anger I'd been holding onto. It didn't happen all at once, but little by little, I started to believe that maybe we could find our way back to each other. Claire was trying, truly trying, and for the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge the effort she was making. It didn't erase what had happened, but it gave me hope that the future could be different. We still had a long road ahead, but for the first time, it didn't feel impossible. As the weeks passed, Claire and I continued to rebuild the fragile bridge between us. The process was slow and filled with moments of doubt, but there were also glimmers of something I hadn't felt in a long time: connection. One weekend, Claire suggested we spend a day at the beach, a place we used to visit frequently in the early years of our marriage. At first, I hesitated, unsure if I could enjoy something that held so many memories of who we used to be. But in the end, I agreed. When we arrived, the salty breeze and the sound of waves crashing against the shore stirred something in me. We walked along the shoreline, our feet sinking into the wet sand, and for the first time in months, the tension between us seemed to ease. "I used to love coming here with you," Claire said, her voice soft. "It always felt like our little escape from everything." "It did," I said, the corners of my mouth lifting slightly. "I guess I forgot how much I missed it." We spent hours talking, reminiscing about old trips, sharing little anecdotes we hadn't thought about in years. At one point, Claire dragged me into the water, laughing as we splashed around like kids. It wasn't a perfect day, there were still moments when the past lingered in the back of my mind, but it felt real. And that was enough. Therapy sessions continued to be a cornerstone of our progress. Dr. Winters encouraged us to focus on small victories and to celebrate the moments when we felt closer rather than dwelling solely on the past. One evening, after a particularly reflective session, Claire brought up an idea that surprised me. "I've been thinking," she said as we sat on the couch. "Maybe we should plan a trip together. Just us. Something to look forward to." "A trip?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," she said, her voice cautious but hopeful. "Nothing big. Maybe just a weekend somewhere quiet. I think it could help us reconnect." I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to resist, afraid of stepping too far too soon. But another part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in us, thought it might be exactly what we needed. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's do it." Her face lit up, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of hope. In the days leading up to the trip, Claire and I worked together to plan everything. We decided on a cozy cabin in the mountains, far from the noise of the city and the distractions of social media. When the weekend arrived, the drive to the cabin was filled with a mix of anticipation and nerves. But once we arrived, the peaceful surroundings seemed to ease the tension. We spent the weekend hiking, cooking meals together, and sitting by the fire with mugs of hot chocolate. Without the constant hum of notifications or the pressure of the outside world, it felt like we were finally able to just be with each other. On the last night, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, Claire reached for my hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" I asked, looking over at her. "For giving me a chance," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm so grateful." I squeezed her hand, my chest tightening. "You're trying, Claire. And that means something." It wasn't a declaration of forgiveness or a promise that everything would be okay. But it was honest. As we drove back home, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. The trip hadn't fixed everything, but it had given us a glimpse of what we could be if we kept working at it. For the first time in months, I felt like we were rediscovering not just each other, but also the love that had brought us together in the first place. The trip to the mountains left us with a renewed sense of possibility, but I knew that rebuilding trust would take more than a weekend getaway. Trust wasn't something that could be fixed with a single gesture or even a string of good days. It would take time, patience, and consistent effort from both of us. Claire seemed to understand that. She continued to make small but meaningful changes in her behavior. She told me about her day in detail, often without me asking, sharing little things that she would have kept to herself before. She stopped guarding her phone and began leaving it on the kitchen counter or beside me on the couch, never flinching if a notification popped up. One evening, as we sat at the table after dinner, Claire handed me her phone. "If you ever feel like checking, you can," she said, her voice steady. "I don't want there to be any secrets anymore." I stared at the phone in her hand, surprised by the gesture. I didn't take it, but the fact that she offered was enough to plant a small seed of reassurance. It wasn't just her openness that helped. It was the way she seemed to prioritize us over everything else. She limited her time on social media, only posting when absolutely necessary for work. Even then, she showed me her posts before they went live, inviting me into a world that had once been a point of contention between us. We also began focusing on rebuilding the foundation of our relationship, communication. Therapy had taught us how to talk to each other in ways that were honest but not hurtful, vulnerable but not overwhelming. "I've been writing about us again," Claire told me one night as we sat on the couch. "In your journal?" I asked, my tone cautious. She nodded. "I've been reflecting on what I did, on how I let things get so bad. It's helped me understand myself better. And, it's helped me realize how much I want to be better for you." Her words struck a chord. For months, I'd been carrying the weight of her betrayal, but hearing her take responsibility for it, without excuses, felt like another step toward healing. One weekend, we decided to tackle a project together, repainting the spare room. It was a small thing, but it felt symbolic, taking a space that had become a refuge for me during our roughest days and turning it into something we could share again. We spent the day covered in paint, laughing as we tried, and failed, to avoid making a mess. By the time we finished, the room was a soft shade of blue, the air filled with the scent of fresh paint and something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. As we stood back to admire our work, Claire looked over at me, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly messy. "Thank you for doing this with me," she said. "It's just a room," I replied, but even as I said it, I knew it was more than that. "No, it's not," she said, her voice soft. "It's us. It's moving forward." That night, as we lay in bed, I found myself reflecting on how far we'd come. There were still moments of doubt, still times when the memory of her betrayal crept into my mind uninvited. But those moments were starting to feel less powerful, less consuming. Claire had shown me, through her actions and her words, that she was committed to rebuilding what we'd lost. And while forgiveness wasn't something I could give all at once, I realized that I was starting to let go of the anger that had weighed me down for so long. Trust wasn't fully restored yet, but the foundation was there. And for the first time, I began to believe that it was strong enough to hold. As the months passed, Claire and I continued to rebuild what had been broken. The trust between us was still fragile, but it was growing stronger with each day, each small step forward. One of the biggest changes was how we prioritized time together. Before, our schedules often felt like parallel lines, busy but rarely intersecting. Now, we made an effort to connect, whether it was through quiet evenings cooking dinner, morning runs through the neighborhood, or just sitting on the porch talking about our plans for the future. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when old doubts crept in, when a certain phrase or look reminded me of what had happened. But Claire handled those moments with patience and understanding, never brushing off my feelings or trying to rush the process. "I know it's going to take time," she told me during one of our therapy sessions. "And I'm okay with that. I'll keep proving myself for as long as it takes." One day, while cleaning out the storage closet, I stumbled upon an old box of photos. Most of them were from our early years together, vacations, holidays, silly candid shots that captured the carefree love we'd once shared. I brought the box into the living room, and Claire's eyes lit up when she saw it. "I forgot we even had these," she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor as she rifled through the prints. We spent hours going through them, laughing at the memories and marveling at how young we looked. One photo in particular caught my attention, a picture of us at the beach, taken during our honeymoon. We were both grinning from ear to ear, our arms wrapped around each other as the waves crashed in the background. "That was such a good day," Claire said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "It was," I agreed, holding the photo in my hands. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness for what we'd lost, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of hope for what we were rebuilding. Therapy also continued to play a crucial role in our progress. Dr. Winters encouraged us to set goals as a couple, not just for our relationship but for our individual growth as well. Claire threw herself into her writing, exploring projects that didn't rely on her social media presence. She told me about her ideas, asked for my input, and shared drafts with me, something she hadn't done in years. As for me, I focused on rediscovering my own passions. I started running regularly again, joined a local photography club, and even volunteered to mentor junior colleagues at work. These small steps reminded me of who I was outside of our marriage, and they gave me the confidence to believe that I was worth more than the pain I'd experienced. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Claire reached for my hand. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice quiet but steady, "about how far we've come. I know it hasn't been easy, and I know I'll never erase what I did, but I'm proud of us." I looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "I am, too," I admitted. "We're not perfect, but we're trying. And that means something." She smiled, her fingers tightening around mine. "It means everything." In that moment, I realized that while the scars of the past would always be there, they didn't have to define us. We had a choice, to dwell on what we'd lost or to focus on what we could still build together. We chose to move forward. Together. A year ago, I never would have imagined we'd be here. Back then, I was consumed by anger, pain, and the overwhelming sense that my world had fallen apart. But now, sitting on the couch with Claire as we plan our next trip together, I feel something I thought I'd lost forever: peace. The journey to this point wasn't easy. It was messy, painful, and filled with doubts. Forgiveness didn't come overnight, and trust had to be rebuilt brick by brick. But through it all, we chose to keep showing up, for ourselves and for each other. Claire is a different person now, or maybe she's just rediscovered the best parts of herself. She's more present, more thoughtful, and more honest than she's ever been. Her career has shifted away from the endless hustle of social media, and she's found fulfillment in writing projects that allow her to express herself authentically. As for me, I've grown in ways I didn't think possible. I've learned to set boundaries, to communicate my needs, and to prioritize my own well-being. The pain of Claire's betrayal forced me to confront my own insecurities, and in doing so, I've become stronger, more confident, and more self-assured. One evening, as we sit on the porch watching the stars, I find myself reflecting on the past year. "Do you think we'll ever be the same?" Claire asks quietly, her hand resting on mine. "No," I say honestly, turning to look at her. "But maybe that's a good thing. We're not the same people we were back then, and maybe that's what we needed to grow." She nods, her expression thoughtful. "I'm just grateful we made it through. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm so thankful for it." "You earned it," I say, my voice steady. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about choosing to move forward. And you've shown me, every day, that you're willing to do the work." Her eyes glisten with unshed tears, and she smiles. "I'll keep doing it. For you, for us." As I look ahead, I feel hopeful. Claire and I will never have the perfect marriage, but perfection isn't the goal. What matters is that we're committed to each other, to learning from our mistakes, and to building a future that's rooted in honesty and love. The scars of the past will always be there, but they no longer hold us back. Instead, They remind us of what we've overcome and how far we've come. Life is unpredictable, and relationships are rarely straightforward. But I've learned that even in the face of betrayal and heartbreak, there's room for growth, healing, and the possibility of something new. As Claire rests her head on my shoulder, I feel a sense of peace that's been hard-won but deeply cherished. We're not perfect, but we're here. And for now, that's more than enough. The future is ours to create, one step at a time.